Okay, let's dive into something truly important today. We're talking about the fate of some of the world's most incredible animals, specifically tigers.
Right. And globally, the big picture for large carnivores, it's not great.
No, it really isn't. We're seeing, what, a huge 80% of these species experiencing decline?
80%.
Mm.
And 60% are actually threatened with extinction. It's quite alarming.
And when you zero in on tigers, it gets even more urgent, doesn't it?
Absolutely. They've
Oh,
disappeared from something like 95% of their historical range. Just think about that.
95%. And in the last century alone, the wild population has just plummeted from maybe 100,000 down to around 4,500 now.
Yeah, it's a drastic drop. And we've actually lost three whole subspecies types of tigers completely.
And that fact that there are more tigers in captivity now than in the wild, that's just stark.
It really is. The threats are, well, there's sadly familiar in conservation. You've got habitat loss, their homes disappearing.
Right, and less food for them, prey depletion.
Exactly. Then there's poaching, illegal hunting, and this growing issue of human-tiger conflict as people and tigers compete for space.
And it's important to remember why we should care, right? Losing a top predator like the tiger, it throws entire ecosystems out of balance.
Definitely. They're a keystone species. Their decline tells us something bigger about the health of these environments and really the planet.
But there is some positive news, some action being taken.
Yes, and that's what's inspiring. Back in 2010, there was a really significant moment, the St. Petersburg Declaration.
Ah, right, where the countries with tigers came together.
Exactly. 13 Tiger Range countries, including Nepal, made this incredibly ambitious commitment to double their wild tiger numbers by 2022, a global rescue mission, essentially.
And Nepal really took that seriously.
They did. They really stepped up their conservation game. It wasn't just one thing. It was, a whole package.
Like cracking down on poaching.
Definitely. Much tougher anti-poaching efforts.
Mm,
But also working with local communities, getting them involved.
that seems crucial.
It is. Plus, restoring habitat, strengthening wildlife laws, and importantly for our discussion today, doing these nationwide surveys to actually count the tigers.
So understanding how they were doing, getting the data.
Precisely. And this is where it gets interesting for conservation globally. How do you take a big international agreement and make it work on the ground?
Which brings us to this deep dive. We're focusing on Nepal's progress in two specific areas, right?
Yes, Banke and Bardia national parks. They're in the western lowlands. And the core question is pretty simple. Did they manage to double their tiger numbers there since 2010?
Okay, so Banke and Bardia, you said they're neighbors.
Yeah, they formed the Banke-Bardia complex. They're ecologically linked, even connect across the border into India. So animals can, potentially move between them.
But there's a key difference in how long they've been protected.
Right. Bardia's got a much longer history as a national park since 1984. So decades of conservation work.
You okay?
Banke, though, is much newer. It only became a national park in 2010, right around the time of the declaration.
Ah, so one established park, one relatively new one. That sets up an interesting comparison.
Exactly. How did these two different areas respond? And to figure that out, researchers use camera traps.
Okay, so these are like automated cameras in the forest.
Pretty much. They trigger when an animal walks past. They collected data using these cameras in 2013, 2018, and then again in 2022.
And the photos are key because each tiger has unique stripes, like a fingerprint.
Exactly like a fingerprint. So scientists use this method called capture mark recapture, or CMR. Basically, they capture a tiger on camera, mark it by its unique stripe pattern in their records, and then see if they recapture it in later photos.
Right. And by tracking which tigers they see and how often, they can estimate things about the whole population.
Precisely. They can estimate the population size, just the total number of tigers there.
Okay, this total count.
And the population density, how crowded it is, basically. How many tigers per, say, 100 square kilometers.
Makes sense.
Then there's the survival rate. What percentage of tigers make it from one year to the next? And finally, the recruitment rate. That's the number of new tigers joining the population. Could be cubs surviving, could be tigers moving in from elsewhere.
Got it. So survival and new arrivals. This data gives a really detailed picture then.
It really does. You can see how the population dynamics are changing over time.
So our mission here is to unpack that data for Banke and Bardia. See how they responded to the conservation push after 2010, look at those demographic changes, survival, recruitment, and see if the patterns differ between the older park, Bardia, and the newer one, Banke.
Right, and the divergence, or maybe similarities between them could tell us a lot.
Okay, so what's the headline? Did the numbers go up?
Oh, absolutely. The main takeaway is overwhelmingly positive. Between 2013 and 2022, both parks saw really significant increases in tiger numbers and density.
Okay, good news then. Let's start with Bardia, the older park.
Right. In Bardia, the estimate went from 49 tigers up to 122.
Wow, 49 to 122. That's more than double.
It is. And the density went from about 3.4 tigers per 100 square kilometers up to over 8.4. That's a 2.5-fold increase in density.
So sustained effort in an established park really paid off there.
It certainly seems so. But then you look at Banke.
The newer park, what happened there?
It's genuinely astonishing. They started from a really low base, just 3 tigers estimated in 2013.
Only 3, okay.
And by 2022, that number jumped to 22.
3 to 22, that's a, what, 7-fold increase?
A 7-fold increase, yeah. The density went from practically nothing, 0.34 tigers per 100 square kilometers, up to 2.42.
Incredible. That really shows the potential for recovery if you give a place protection, especially if it's connected to another population.
Absolutely. It highlights that recovery potential brilliantly.
Okay, so big increases overall. But let's dig into the details a bit, especially in Bardia with its longer history. What did the demographics look like? Survival rates?
Yeah, looking closer at Bardia, there were some interesting nuances. For survival, female tigers consistently did better. Their survival rate was around 87 to 89% each year.
Okay, pretty high. What about the males?
Lower. More like 73 to 77% survival for males.
Quite a difference. Why would that be?
The study suggests it's likely down to male behavior. Male tigers have these large territories they defend really aggressively.
Right.
This leads to more fights with other males, what scientists call intraspecific aggression, basically tiger-on-tiger fighting. And those fights can be fatal.
Ah, so the males are fighting each other more.
Seems like it. Females have smaller territories. They often overlap more, so they probably face less of that intense, dangerous conflict. Hence, better survival.
That makes sense. Okay, so what about recruitment? New tigers joining the population in Bardia.
Interestingly, recruitment rates were actually higher for males than females in Bardia, and they were higher earlier on, between 2013 and 2018, compared to later.
Huh. More males coming in, but fewer surviving.
Kind of balances out, perhaps. But despite that higher male recruitment, the female population actually grew faster, about 6 to 7% per year,
Okay.
while the male population grew only around 2% per year. So overall, Bardia's tiger population grew at about 4% annually.
So the higher female survival was really driving the growth.
It seems that way. Longer living females raising young successfully, and the researchers noted this pattern, good female survival, steady growth, is kind of typical for recovering tiger populations elsewhere, like in India, where there's a decent amount of prey.
So Bardia might be settling into a more stable, maturing recovery phase.
That's the suggestion, yeah. Becoming more like other successfully recovering populations.
Okay, now back to Banke and that incredible 7-fold jump. What was driving that explosive growth?
Well, Banke is a different story. Survival rates there were super high for both males and females, like 90% or more, consistently.
90%. Wow, why so high there?
Probably because they started with so few tigers. Low density meant plenty of space, less competition. And the prey base was recovering too.
So less reason for tigers to fight each other.
Exactly. Minimal intraspecific aggression. Everyone had room to roam, find food,
And recruitment in Bank. Lots of new tigers showing up.
Yes, high recruitment for both sexes too. But interestingly, it was significantly higher during that initial phase, 2013 to 2018, when the park was really being recolonized.
Okay, so it slowed down a bit later.
It did, but it was still high. So Bank saw these huge annual growth rates like 18 to 20% in those early years.
18 to 20% per year? That's phenomenal.
It really is. Even later, it was still growing at over 8% per year.
Where were all these new tigers coming from? Just reproduction within Bank?
Likely a mix. Reproduction within Bank certainly played a role, but the researchers think a lot of it was tigers dispersing, basically, moving out from the bigger population next door in Bardia.
Ah, so tigers from Bardia were spilling over into the newly protected Bank.
Exactly. Bank became this attractive new territory as conditions improved. It shows how important connected landscapes are. Success in one area can literally seed recovery in another.
That connection is key.
Definitely. But the study also adds a note of caution for Bank.
Oh.
As that population keeps growing and density increases, you might start to see more competition, more fighting.
So those super high survival and recruitment rates might not last forever.
Potentially not. It's kind of a natural process as the population gets closer to what the environment can support, the carrying capacity.
Right, things start to balance out. One other point they mentioned was the sex ratio, more females than males in both parks.
Yeah, about 60 males for every 100 females. That's actually quite common in tigers.
Why is that?
Well, tigers have what's called a polygynous mating system. That means one male might mate with multiple females. So having more females seems to be a sort of typical structure for healthy tiger populations,
Interesting. And quickly, they also noted density was lower at higher elevations.
right? Tigers tend to prefer those lowland forest and grassland areas. More cover, and critically, more prey animals down there.
Makes sense. So, stepping back, this really does sound like a major conservation win for Nepal in these parks.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
It shows that these focused efforts, triggered by that international commitment, can genuinely bring a species back from the brink in specific locations.
A real testament to dedicated conservation work.
For sure. But, we have to remember, these populations, even though they're growing, are still relatively small islands in a way. They're still vulnerable. The job isn't done.
And bigger populations can bring new problems, right?
They certainly can. The study points this out clearly. As density goes up, you get those density-dependent effects we talked about, potentially more tiger conflict.
Uh-huh.
But perhaps the more immediate challenge is rising human-tiger conflict.
Ah, yes. More tigers means more potential encounters with people.
Exactly. And they saw this starkly in Bardia. In 2022 alone, over 250 interactions were reported. Tragically, that included 6 human deaths and 4 injuries.
Oh, wow, that's serious. It really drives home that conservation has to involve people.
It absolutely has to. Finding ways for people and tigers to coexist is maybe the critical next step for long-term success.
So what kind of things can be done? What mitigation strategies did they mention?
Well, several practical things. Things like building better, more secure enclosures for livestock so tigers can't easily prey on them.
Okay, protecting livelihoods.
Right. And community awareness, educating people about tiger behavior, how to stay safe. Insurance schemes can also help, compensating people if they do lose livestock.
Financial safety nets?
Yeah, and providing alternative ways for people to make a living, things that don't bring them into conflict zones, and maybe most importantly, really involving local communities in conservation planning and action, giving them ownership.
So it's not just about stopping bad things from happening, but actively building coexistence.
Precisely. Moving beyond just conflict mitigation towards fostering genuine coexistence. Things like responsible ecotourism that actually benefits local people, providing incentives for conservation. It's about recognizing that protecting tigers also protects the whole ecosystem, has cultural value, boosts local economies, and builds national pride.
Okay, so to wrap things up then, the big takeaway is that Nepal has made truly remarkable progress in Banke and Bardia since 2010. A real success story.
Absolutely. It shows that sustained, well-funded, well-planned conservation can work wonders, even for species facing huge challenges.
But as we finish, maybe a final thought for our listeners. While Nepal hit this doubling target in these key areas, what does this mean more broadly?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? What lessons from Nepal's success and its ongoing challenges can be applied elsewhere, maybe in tougher situations? How do we ensure tigers persist across their entire range, not just in a few strongholds?
And how do we maintain this momentum, balancing tiger needs with human needs on a planet that's increasingly crowded?
Exactly. It's complex. It requires ongoing commitment. But Nepal's story, I think, offers some really valuable insights and maybe most importantly, a significant dose of hope for the future of tigers.